Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Defiant Lawyers. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we want to talk to you about the YSL, the Young Thug Rico trial, and the plea deals. We got a lot to talk about. I know that you want to tune in and find out what's going on with this very, very important legal matter in the state of Georgia, and it has implications for rappers throughout the United States of America. We're going to give you our legal analysis. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right. Thank you for hanging out with us today on the Defiant Lawyers. We are the father and daughter legal team who each and every week we give you a legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy this unjust legal system. If you're not a subscriber, I'm wondering, what are you waiting on? What are you waiting on? Please hurry up, do this. Chloe and I would love to finish the year out with 5,000 new subscribers. All that would have to happen between now and midnight tonight. That's pretty aggressive, but hey, I believe it can be done. So, Chloe, with all that said, happy belated Merry Christmas, and I'm wishing and praying that you have a very prosperous, productive, safe, happy New Year. How are you doing, sweetheart?
Thank you, Dad. I'm doing so well. Happy New Year, everyone. We thank everyone for joining us, listening to us, and interacting with us. I am so excited for 2023. There's a lot that we have in store. This is actually episode 1 of season 2 of the podcast. We made it to season 2, you all. Thank you so much for being on this journey with us. We have bigger and better things that we have planned for this season. So I'm so glad that I'm able to be here with you today, Dad and Mom, in the background as we usher in the new year, doing what we love to do, which is to provide the legal analysis of these topics.
So again, we thank you all for tuning in, and please, all your comments and so forth, listen, we'd love to hear from them. Even if you disagree or you think that we didn't get something right, we still love it. During the replay, a lot of you all will comment and say things, thanking us for our legal analysis and sometimes making suggestions. We take it all to heart because, again, we're trying to grow a community of folks who want to be informed and educated about the law and how to use the law in your daily life. That is the whole purpose of our show. It is the reason why we've been coming on every Saturday, almost every Saturday, for months now, and we continue to do so. And as Chloe said, yes, this is, Chloe, is this actually our first podcast of the new season?
This is our first podcast of the new season, of season 2. And if you all don't know, we do have an audio podcast that you can listen on all podcast streaming sites, whether it be Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to podcasts. The Defiant Lawyers will be there. And we will upload today's episode today as well. So if you're not able to catch this live show, then you can go and listen to our podcast and usher in the new year right with us.
And, Chloe, I think it's so important that we provide that audio podcast because sometimes folks may not be in a situation where they can watch video, but they can always put on the podcast in their headphones, listen to it in their headphones in the car while they're working out, while they're going to sleep at night. So much more convenient than having to necessarily watch a video. So Podbean, the defiantlawyers.podbean.com is where you can find us. Let me say it again, the defiantlawyers.podbean, like black beans, podbean.com. Again, the defiantlawyers.podbean.com. All right, so go check it out. Check it out. All right, Chloe, let's get into our very first topic for today. And before we talk about the Young Thug Rico trial and plea deals, I want to highlight a very sad and tragic story out of Columbus, Ohio. I want to put the faces of the several people who were involved in this tragic matter on the screen. And it is this story, and I don't know all the facts, we don't have all the facts, but this man, Craig Butler, I presume I'm pronouncing it correctly, Craig or Krieg A. Butler, a 32, 33-year-old Columbus, Ohio man, shot and killed the young man on the other side of the screen, Sinzay Reed. He was only 13 years old. 13 years old. This reminds me of Tamir Rice. Yeah. This reminds me of Trayvon Martin, given the young age of this kid. From what I understand, this dude shot this kid. He was charged with murder, and then he claimed self-defense, and the state dropped the charge. And his family, Sinzay Reed, his family, are wondering and asking the authorities, why did you all drop the charges? This was a 13-year-old child that this man shot to death. Chloe, when I first heard this story, I was both saddened, I got teary-eyed, and angered that this callous act. And again, I don't know the ins and outs of the story, but I do know that this kid was shot to death by this older man, and the family is on the record saying that Sinzay Reed did not have any weapons. So where this self-defense claim comes from, I don't know, but it's a sad situation. And if there is any malicious intent here, I hope this family gets justice and that guy is held accountable, Chloe.
Yeah, justice for Sinzay, who was a child, a beloved child, and the fact that a grown man took his life, allegedly, and has not been held accountable. I am joining in with the voices of Sinzay Reed's family on why. Why were the charges dropped? What are the next steps moving forward? What is the district attorney going to do for the county of Columbus, Ohio, in order to try to get justice for Sinzay? That, based on what I read, an article out of the Columbus Dispatch, the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office had previously filed a murder charge against Creed Butler, and he was held on a $1 million bond, according to reporting. However, the prosecutors out of Franklin County filed a motion to dismiss the case, and the judge signed that dismissal, therefore getting rid of the $1 million bond and dismissing the case. Now, what is being reported is that, and this was done in the Franklin County Municipal Court. I don't know the details of the levels of court there in Ohio, but it was reported that another court, a commons plea court, that the case may be presented in that type of court for grand jury proceedings. So I hope that happens. I don't know if it will happen, but as of now, Creed Butler is a free man, and that murder charge was dismissed against him, which is sad.
Yeah, we don't know the court system in Ohio. We're licensed to practice here in Texas. Here in Texas, a municipal court is a court that handles Class C misdemeanors, speeding tickets, that sort of thing. So a case like that would have never ended up in a municipal court here in Texas. Now, again, municipal courts may have jurisdiction over murder cases in Ohio. We have no idea. We're not Ohio lawyers. And I, too, hope that maybe the case was filed in the wrong place or something. I do know that maybe this is what happened, when I think about it. When someone is arrested here in Texas, they are oftentimes taken to a jail out of in the county, but out of the city of Dallas, where the county jail is. So if someone's arrested, for example, in DeSoto here, they would go to a DeSoto jail, which is a municipal jail, right? It's like a city jail. And they would be held there until they were transferred over to the county court, which is Lou Sterrett here in Dallas County. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe maybe he was being held in the municipal court, and the prosecutors dismissed the case, and he was released from the municipal court. I have no idea. Um, but that's the closest thing that I can come up with. But whatever, I hope that this case is presented to a grand jury and that this man is indicted and they get to the bottom of this shooting. Okay. You all, please help get this story out. A lot of times these stories do not really get the attention from local authorities until they have circulated on social media. It was months before we heard about the Ahmaud Arbery case. Months. Quite some time before the nation heard about Trayvon Martin, so forth and so on. Please share this story. Share this story. Get it out. Because oftentimes for us African Americans, before we can get justice in the court of law, we have to get justice in the court of public opinion.
That's right. And I want to add one last thing, that there was a media release from the Franklin County prosecuting attorney, Greg Tyatt, who said that um, it is standard practice for almost every felony case filed in municipal court to be dismissed. But, quote, not every case initiated in municipal court is presented to the grand jury. This particular case is still under review for possible presentation to the grand jury, and unfortunately, I cannot advise you when the case will be presented to the grand jury. End quote. So that is a statement from the prosecuting attorney out there in Columbus, Ohio. And like we've said, we do hope that that district attorney will present it to the grand jury, and Craig Buckler is indicted. And we hope that you all will support Sensei Reed's family and spread this story of his death on social media so that it gets into the larger news cycle, and so that light can be shed on this tragedy, because it is a tragedy.
Absolutely. All right, Chloe. So we're going to get into the Young Thug, the YSL Rico trial and plea deals. And after that, I think you got a few updates about the Tory Lanez case.
Yes.
Okay, so the YSL Rico trial and plea deals. Um, let's bring a few things up on the screen. Some folks may not really even know, as I didn't, who Young Thug is. But he is an Atlanta rapper. His name is Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, and him and 27 of his co-defendants were indicted under Georgia's RICO statute, um, and have been incarcerated since they were arrested. I believe it was 2 years ago, and this week, actually, this week coming up, first week in January, they're supposed to start picking a jury for a trial of some of the 28 folks who were arrested along with and indicted along with Jeffrey Williams. Now, the current status of this prosecution is, again, 28 people were indicted under Georgia's RICO statute. And we did a video discussing in depth what Georgia's RICO statute is all about. Please go back and listen to that video. The indictment alleged, among many other things, that members of the YSL, those 28 defendants, are part of a street gang. YSL, they claim, alleged that initial stands for Young Slime Life, I believe. And so as of right now, 6 of those 28 defendants will have separate trials. 8 have pled guilty. 8 have pled guilty. That's a big, big, big development. And 14 will stand trial, like I said, which is scheduled to begin this upcoming week, the first week in January. So, Chloe, that's sort of an introduction of where this case is. Tell us more.
Yeah, before we get into the current plea deals of several YSL members, there was another rapper associated with this case called Gunna. He's pretty popular as well. He has become more popular in the last few years, but he accepted a plea deal earlier this month called an Alfred plea, which is where he was able to maintain his innocence, but acknowledge that pleading guilty is in his best interest, and doesn't necessarily plead guilty to all of the charges in the indictment that was issued against him. And pursuant to that plea, he was sentenced to 5 years with one served in prison, but that 1 year prison sentence was commuted to time served for the time that he's already served in jail. And the 4 year remaining sentence was suspended, and he will be on probation, and he has to complete special conditions during that probation. So he is another very prominent rapper who was associated with this YSL Rico case, who did an Alfred plea. He has probation for 4 years in which he has to maintain certain conditions. And he took this Alfred plea in contrast with the other prominent member, Young Thug, who decided to plead guilty. I mean, not guilty, and to go to trial on the case in January. So that was interesting. And one thing that he maintained, he gave a statement, and he said, quote, "While I have agreed to always be truthful, I want to make it perfectly clear that I have not made any statements, have not been interviewed, have not cooperated, have not agreed to testify or be a witness for or against any party in the case, and have absolutely no intention of being involved in the trial process in any way," end quote. So he wanted to make it clear that he was not a snitch, basically, which is in contrast to the 6 guys we're about to talk about here soon, where they did a lot of snitching.
Yeah. I, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Um, you know, yeah, we'll come to that. We got a lot to say about that, and we got some video we're going to share too. Um, so another person who pled also, but I have a question about this guy's plea, Chloe. I
Hmm.
don't know if you were able to ascertain it, but so you said Gunner was able to accept a plea deal without admitting guilt.
Right.
So is that our version of, or is that a Georgia's version of a Nola Contandre no contest plea?
Perhaps it could be. I
That's
know
what it
that
sounds like,
it,
right?
yeah, the plea is named after a 1970 Supreme Court case,
Yeah, an
North
Alfred plea.
Carolina v. Alford.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of you're pleading, you're maintaining your innocence, but you're saying, you know what, the prosecutors can probably prove the case against me. But you don't have to come out right and say that you plead guilty.
Okay.
I think
Yeah,
that's
that
the most
sounds like a
simplest
no
way to go about
contest
it.
plea.
Right. And
I
that could
mean,
be their version in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it it for all intents and purposes is still the consequences are the same. Um, However, the fact that the state allowed him to do that sort of indicates to me that the state's case against him may have been weak. Um, because the state doesn't typically give an inch if they have a strong case against somebody.
Yep.
I know here, if the state feels very strongly about its case, they're going to want a guilty plea. They're going to want you to plead guilty, not no contest. So I don't know. We don't know Georgia law. Okay, so I think it's time for a video.
Yeah. There's a lot of these videos that have come out the past week of these YSL members plea deals that were live.
Let me put one other person on. I think this guy's case is really interesting as well. Um, Quantavious Greer. Now, it's my understanding, I don't know these folks. All right. I don't know. I never heard of Young Thug until he got indicted. Okay. So this is not my crowd. This is not my genre of music. Um, but I understand this guy, Quantavious Greer, is Jeffrey Williams, Young Thug's brother. And it's my understanding that he also accepted a plea deal. Chloe, what do you know about that?
Yeah, he did. It was reported that he pled guilty to one count of violating the RICO Act and one count of theft by receiving stolen property. And it's also reported that he is Young Thug's brother, that his rapper name was Unfunk, and that he accepted a 12-year sentence with 2 years commuted to time served and 10 years probation. And I will say that's a long time to be on probation.
It is.
And we're going to play video showing where the terms of that probation, no drug use, no picking up new charges, travel restraints, etc. And here in Texas, if a person violates probation, that person can be rearrested, taken before the judge, adjudicated, and depending on the type of probation that they were on, if it's deferred adjudication, they could get sentence in um, a sentence in the max of the deferred adjudication probation, or if it's regular probation where they were already convicted, they can be given a sentence for the max punishment range for the crime that they were on probation on. So it's very serious for the state to allege that you violated probation. And 10 years is an extremely long time to be under the thumb of the state. So it'd be interesting to see how these individuals perform while they're on probation for these amounts of time.
Yes. Yeah, probation for 10 years is an extremely long time to be on probation. Some of them got probation for even longer periods than that, the ones who accepted these plea deals. One of them was placed on probation for 15 years. 15 years on paper, as they said here. Um, okay, so let's play a video. Now, this video is a video where the judge admonishes two two defendants um, who rejected the plea deal. At least at this time, they may change their mind when I don't know if the state will leave the plea open until trial begins. But for now, last thing I read is these two guys rejected the plea deal, and it seemed like the judge was really trying to really seriously warn them that if they got convicted, the consequences would be very severe. So let's hear that video.
Before we play the video, Dad, I think we should remind everyone what RICO stands for,
Okay.
just in case they forgot. And it stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations. So basically, it's alleging that defendants have participated in organized crime and committed crimes while in an organization. So typically, it goes out after gangs. Historically, it was used at the federal level to go after the mafia and things of that nature.
Exactly. All right. Very good. So can and again, we did an in-depth analysis of the RICO statute. So go to our videos and watch that video. All right. Here is the judge admonishing two of these defendants who rejected the plea deal.
She has not put that on record for purposes of posterities, but she's ready to do that this time, okay?
We're ready, Michael.
Ready, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am, go right ahead.
Your Honor, as it relates to Mr. Tinquarius Mender, Mr. Mender is charged with count 1 of the indictment, conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, which carries a sentence of 5 to 20 years. He's also charged with count 44 of the indictment, which is possession of a weapon by an incarcerated individual, which carries a sentence of 1 to 5 years. Count 45, possession of a telecommunication device by an incarcerated individual, which carries a sentence of 1 to 5 years. And last, count 46, which is participation in criminal street gang activity, which carries a sentence of 5 to 20 years. Mr. Mender is an ANC recidivist. The state did file a recidivist notice on December 9th of this year. If Mr. Mender was found guilty of all the counts in the indictment, he would be looking at a maximum exposure of 50 years to serve in prison.
And now, could you explain the difference, I think, for Ms. I'm sure that Ms. Fagan has probably explained that to her client, but can you tell for the benefit of the record and for Mr. Mender's benefit, what potentially may happen if he were to be convicted of any of these particular counts? Like what would, under A or C?
Yes, if he's convicted of any of the counts, as an ANC recidivist, Mr. Mender, you would have to get the maximum amount on for that charge, and then whatever time the court gives you, which if it was to be the maximum, you have to spend every day door to door, which means you have to spend every day in custody.
He get no good time.
No.
It's a to-the-door sentence.
Yes, he would get any credit for a time served.
Of course, yeah,
but
absolutely.
anything else would be a full sentence door to door.
All right, so first let's stop there and let's make sure we understand what we heard. So, wow. So bottom line, this particular defendant, Mr. Mender, is if he's convicted, the state has filed something there in Georgia called a recidivism motion or something, and they would be, if he's convicted, the judge would be bound to sentence Mr. Mender to 50 years in the penitentiary, and he would get no good time. So he couldn't pick up any time while in prison, but he would get back time for any time that he spent in prison. And the way they characterized it there in Georgia, I never heard that characterization here in Texas, but from door to door, which means you'd serve every day of it, every day. So he would be facing the 50 years minus, I think, about 2 years of back time. So if he's found guilty, Mr. Mender would be facing approximately 48 years in prison, and the judge would have no discretion on that. Chloe, did I get that right?
Yes. And the door to door is interesting to me as well, because here in Texas, if a person is convicted of an offense that's not a 3G offense, so the more the higher level felonies like murder, kidnapping, robbery, etc., and they're sentenced to prison time here in Texas, then there is a chart that we use that will typically give guidance to when that person can be released from prison. So if a person is sentenced to 4 years in prison, then they will be parole eligible after, I don't know the specific times, but they don't have to serve the 4 years door to door. What the judge asked the prosecutor to explain to the defendants in this case is, one, If you're convicted, I have to sentence you to the max, which is 50 years. And 2, you will not be parole eligible, basically. You have to serve the full 50-year sentence, which is wow. Because even here in Texas, under 3G offenses, if a person is convicted of murder, robbery, kidnapping, and the other 3G offenses, they're still parole eligible after serving half of their sentence. But this statute here in Georgia, you're sentenced to the max and you're not parole eligible. You have to serve the full sentence.
So basically, you either do the full sentence or you're carried out in a coffin.
Yeah.
So that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy. All right. So with that understanding, so what you're going to see is you're going to see the judge strongly, strongly warn these two young men to carefully consider this, okay? Because he wouldn't have any discretion whatsoever. All right, let's go back to the video.
She has not put that on record for purposes of posterities, but she's ready to do that this time, okay?
We're ready, Michael.
I apologize. That video went back. So let's go back and I'll just fast forward it.
She has not put that on record for.
Mr. Mender, you would have to get the maximum amount on for that charge, and then whatever time the court gives you, which if it was to be the maximum, you have to spend every day door to door, which means you have to spend every day in custody.
You get no good time.
No.
It's a to-the-door sentence.
Yes, he would get any credit for a time served.
Of course, yeah,
But
absolutely.
anything else would be a full sentence door to door.
So his max is 50 years?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and what's the state's offer?
Yes, Your Honor. The state's offer for Mr. Mender as to count 1 is 16 years to serve 1 year, committed to time served, with a balance of 15 years on probation. The state would offer that his probation could be terminated upon successful completion of the first 10 years of this sentence, provided that he violated no provisions of the agreement or no special conditions of the agreement, and that he violates no law of the state of Georgia. As to count 44, the state's recommendation is 5 years to serve 1 year, commuted to time served, with a balance to be served on probation, concurrent with count 1. As to count 45, it would be 5 years to serve 1 year, commuted to time served and confinement. Commuted to time served, followed by 4 years on probation, concurrent with counts 1 and 44. And count 46 would be 16 years to serve 1 year, commuted to time served, followed by 15 years on probation, concurrent with count 1, 44, and 45. Would be the offer. Mr. Mender also is currently on another indictment, 21 SC 178250. And this case, as a part of the agreement, would run concurrent with that case whenever he resolved that other case, Your Honor.
Is that before me or before another division?
It is in this division currently, Your Honor. And that's being handled by ADA Lauren Jansen with the state.
Does he have bond on that case ending in 250?
I don't believe he has a bond on that case. No, he has a no bond status.
But on this case, he could go home today.
Correct. If he was given a bond, he would. This case, he would not have served any jail time on this case.
Okay.
And that offer will also conclude today, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Fagan, have you communicated that to your client in terms of is that to correctly summarize the plea agreement or the potential plea offer, I should say?
The only change was that he wasn't aware of the concurrent status for the second case. At this time, though, he still maintains a not guilty plea.
Sure.
Respectfully rejects the offer, and we announce ready for trial.
Okay, Mr. Mender, I'll tell you and I'll tell Mr. Beebe and Mr. Stevens the same thing, okay? At this point.
Okay, before we go further, let's understand what that plea offer said. Go ahead, Chloe.
So there's two indictments. On the first indictment, there were two counts. From what I heard, with the first count, the state offered him 15 years. He would get back time for 1 year and would be on probation for the remaining years. And during that time, he would be on probation conditions and special conditions, as well as not being able to commit any violations of Georgia law. On the second count of that indictment, it was a 5 year um, offer, and he would get the back time for the 1 year served, and then the remaining 4 years he would be on probation, same conditions. It sounded like no violations of the law. And what is a plea offer? What is a plea deal? So a plea offer is an offer from the state and the prosecutors representing the state, for the in which the defendant can come into an agreement for punishment, and that agreement would be presented to the judge, who has the ultimate authority whether or not to approve that agreement, or the judge, at least here in Texas, the judge can reject that plea offer, and the state and the defendant would either have to come up with another plea agreement that would be that would suffice for the judge, or the defendant would plead not guilty and take his or her case to trial.
All right, very good. There were two things that stood out with me, several things. One, the state is trying to really sweeten up this deal. It sounds to me like they really want to flip as many of these co-defendants as possible. They probably got their eyes really set on Jeffrey Williams, young thug who is the one that is most well known. And I presume the one that they consider to be the gang leader of YSL. All this is allegedly with respect to Mr. Williams. Another thing that stands out to me is, Chloe, everything is concurrent. And so it's not consecutive. You don't do one, then start the other. You do it all at the same time, like you said. And third of all, I did hear her say, I was listening to hear whether she said that the plea offer was concluded that day. So they were not extending the plea offer until a later date, trial date. The way she said, it concludes today. You take it today, you get this today, or you don't get it. Now, we've seen prosecutors say that and then still offer it on the day of trial or some subsequent day, But that is what she said. So, wow.
And to your point, your first point, Dad, about them trying to get rid of some of these alleged YSL members. From what we've seen, a lot of these plea deals, and if they agree to the plea deal, if the defendant agrees to the plea deal, it's to testify truthfully. So it sounds like they're wanting these alleged YSL members to testify against Young Thug, who, I agree with you, seems to be the top dog that they're trying to go after and send a message against as well.
Yes. And I'll hold those comments until we see the next video. Chloe, there's a lot more. I do want to play. I want to get to the other video, but I do want to play some of what the judge said before we go to the next video. The next video is fascinating, really fascinating. Yeah. But I want you all to hear how much the judge seemed to want these guys to seriously consider this plea. Okay? All right, let's go back.
She has not put that on the record for purposes of a presumption, and the presumptions and protections you enjoy as a criminal accused. You have to decide for yourselves what you want to do in this particular case. Depending upon the results or the outcome of the trial. The only thing I would tell you, Mr. Mender, is the most, and I'm sure that Ms. Fagan, she's a very fine attorney. Seen her work. But trials, there's one thing about trials, it's uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. So you gotta beat 4 counts. And if you don't beat them, what'll happen is, under this A and C recidivist statute, I have to, under the law, sentence you to the maximum sentence. And then whatever I sentence you to, you serve to the door. That's not anything I have any discretion over. It's not anything because I don't like you or because of what you're being charged with.
I do want to say now I think I understand what they're doing with this recidivist statute that they have in Georgia. The equivalent here in Texas would be the habitual statute. I think that's what they're referring to. I think maybe Mr. Mender had some prior offenses, some prior charges, and essentially the state has basically said if he's convicted, then we're going to under the statute ask for an enhanced sentence, basically. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I agree. And we have that version here in Texas, like you said. It's commonly called the 3 strikes rule. And oftentimes prosecutors will seek that out if the defendant is convicted. And it's a more severe punishment.
Yeah. So you heard the judge there. I don't want to stay on that video too long. You heard the judge. They're really trying to get Mr. Mender to seriously consider the decision he was making. I heard him say you got 4 counts. You could beat 2, beat 3, and then you convicted on 1. You're going to get the same consequences. So he's really, really, really. We've been there many times. Where the potential consequences could be horrible. And the plea deal is not that sweet, but it's a lot better because the judge is right. You never know what the jury's going to do. I mean, you just never, ever, you cannot predict what the jury is going to do in these cases. You can guesstimate, you can speculate, but you don't know. You don't know. Now, the defense just has to raise reasonable doubt, with one jury member. But whether the defense is able to do that, I don't know what the evidence is like. I can't say for certain what his chance of winning that trial is. But I do know that if he is convicted, the consequences will be severe. To have to spend almost 50 years in prison, and you're a young man. I mean, he looks to be in his 20s, and have to spend the next 50 years in prison is something serious to think about, really serious to think about.
Yeah. And as attorneys, we direct and conduct the legal strategy and to, further our client's interests. But in terms of plea deals, it is up to the accused, to the defendant, whether or not to accept or reject that plea deal. We can strongly advise our clients to take or reject the plea deal, or, the evidence shows this, and it's our duty to explain what the evidence does and does not show. But at the end of the day, it is up to that defendant whether or not to accept that plea deal. And so it is good, like what is happening now, to get on the record an admonishment from the judge explaining exactly what the potential consequences could be if the defendant is convicted of the charge. And we do that all the time. So this is a good example of what an admonishment from a judge looks like.
Yes, it's very important to make sure the defendant understands what the plea is. You heard the state tell him exactly what the plea is on the record. There's a record of it. He can't come back and say his lawyer didn't tell him, that he didn't know. He knows. Everybody knows. Everybody heard it. The stenographer got it on the record. It'll be a part of his case file. And so not only is it important for him, it's also important for his counsel. So that, again, if this goes left, he cannot say, ineffective assistance to counsel. I didn't know. She didn't tell me. She didn't advise me. Well, the judge did. and I'm sure she did as well. Okay, let's go to the next video, Chloe. We ready to go?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
This one is fascinating, you all. This is
Yeah.
fascinating because this defendant is accepting this plea, and then he's going to answer questions on the record in open court about the indictment. I got a few things to say about this on the other end of this video. All right, let's go. Oh, my video's not playing. Chloe.
Come on now. Come on, technology. Let's get it.
Yeah, go ahead and take it there. Give me a second to get this video. I don't know what's going on with it, but we'll get it straightened out.
So, it's been very fascinating following these hearings of these alleged YSL members and the defendants. The state has a high burden. The state has to prove each of these cases beyond a reasonable doubt, and not each case, but each count as well. And it's such a good point that you brought out, Dad, about how the state seems to be trying to sweeten the deal and highlighting the sweetness of the deal, because they, for each defendant and each count alleged against that defendant and each element in that count, the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that's a lot of work, I'm sure, and that's a lot of evidence to go through. So they were able to take out, I think, 8 or 9
It was 8,
of these
I think.
defendants.
The last I heard was 8.
Was 8.
And notice also, Chloe, the judge made it his business to say that you'll go home today, Mr. Mender.
Yeah.
Okay. As of right now, he was being held on an insufficient bond. That's why he had been in jail for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But the judge seemed like he would probably give him a bond and release him immediately upon him accepting this plea and doing the paperwork, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that sweetened it even more. In other words, if you're ready to get out of here, then I can make that happen today if you accept that plea. Now, I'm not suggesting that the judge is trying to manipulate or push him or coerce him. The judge knows very well he cannot do that. I think the judge is really just trying to make him understand, if you lose at trial, my hands are going to be tied, and you're going to likely spend the rest of your years behind bars.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Mender is probably considering, probably more than anything else, not the probation, being on probation for what? Is it 15 years, Chloe?
Yeah.
I don't think that's big. That's huge, because that in and of itself is likely not going to work out right. I mean, being on probation 15 years, not doing anything over the next 15 years is a high standard. I think more than anything else, what he's thinking about, I don't know this to be true, is the fact that he probably would have to testify against other people. And there is this thing about snitching. There is this thing about snitching in the African-American community. And not just the Black community, but, for example, in the mafia community, in any kind of organized crime community. And the Black community is not organized crime, but I'm saying any organized crime within any community. You don't snitch on your brothers. You don't do that. That's probably what's weighing on his mind more than anything else.
And in the Black community, Dad, besides organized crime, it's a thing of, don't be putting our business out there, basically.
Don't be
putting our business out
there. Don't be putting our business out there, number one, and number two. So you rolling with the police now. We know the relationship we've had with the police over the years, law enforcement, the criminal justice system. So it's like you're now taking sides with the system that treat us so badly over the years. So that's another thing. I mean, so it's a lot
and not
of
even related to crime. It's just what happens in this house stays in this house. It doesn't have, it's just that's just kind of that's just kind of the mindset and culture that a lot of black families have.
Yeah. I grew up with that. No snitching. I grew up with that myself. But all right, let's hear this video. I think she's ready.
Good afternoon, counsel. Insert party from here on the record. The state of Georgia versus Trontavia Stevens in indictment 22 SC 183572. Good evening, Ms. Gladden, and good evening, Mr. Stevens.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening. And good evening, Ms. Love, and good evening, Ms. Hilton. Good evening, Your Honor. All right. Mr. Stevens, can I get you to raise your right hand the best you're able, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you shall give in the matter now in hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or so firm?
I do.
All right, you need to speak up, sir.
I do.
Okay, all right. Put your hand down. All right, Mr. Stevens, over the next several minutes, I'm sure Ms. Gladden has probably told you, we're going to go through what's called a providency inquiry. Half of it is what we call your Boykin rights. That means those are constitutional rights that every criminal accused enjoys. Meaning, because in our system of jurisprudence, we don't force people to plead guilty. So courts have to make sure you understand your rights and you give those up freely and voluntarily before I can sentence you, okay? So that's the first part. The second part of the inquiry, the state has to lay out a factual basis as to what they would have been able to prove at trial beyond a reasonable doubt. So assuming that they can, those two things, they pass, then I can determine that your plea is provident and accept your negotiated plea, okay? Yeah, you gotta answer
Yes, sir.
yes or no for the record. Okay, all right. So, Ms. Love, is it gonna be you, Ms. Love?
It's going to be
Okay. Ms. Hilton is gonna ask you a series of questions that's designed to get at the two areas we talked about. When she's done, your attorney, Ms. Gladden, will offer me some things on your behalf, and then you and I will have a short conversation, and I should be able to accept your plea, okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right, madam, go right ahead.
Thank you. May I take off my mask?
You can, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, if you could please state your true and correct legal name.
Trontavia Stevens.
And are you the same person referred to as Trontavia Stevens, also known as Tick and also known as Slug, on indictment 22 SC 183572?
Yes.
Are you at this time taking or under the influence of any alcohol, drugs, or medicine?
No.
How old are you?
29.
And how far have you gone in school?
I got a GED.
Okay. Are you able to read, write, and understand the English language?
Yes.
Do you understand that you are charged in this indictment with count 1, conspiracy to violate the Racketeer, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act?
Yes.
Do you understand that you have the right to plead either guilty or not guilty to these charges?
Yes.
And if you plead not guilty or remain silent, you may receive a jury trial.
Yes.
Have you had enough time to speak with your lawyer, your attorney Gladden, about all the facts and circumstances known to you regarding the charge in this indictment?
Yes.
Have you also been able to speak with her about any potential defenses?
Yes.
Do you need any more time to discuss this matter with your attorney?
No.
Are you satisfied with her counsel and representation?
Yes.
Do you waive formal reading of the indictment?
Excuse me?
So waived.
Yes. I asked if you and your attorney waive formal reading of the indictment.
That means they don't want to read the charge.
If not, I gotta read the indictment,
Oh.
So waived.
okay?
Yes.
All right.
Do you waive any and all defects, if any, with respect to the indictment?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens, have you been arrested on these charges?
You've been arrested on these charges.
Yes.
Okay. And Your Honor, the state is unaware of any outstanding warrants related to these charges. Ms. Gladden, are you aware of any outstanding warrants as it relates to these charges?
I'm not.
Okay. Has your attorney advised you of the minimum and maximum sentence for the charge in which you are pleading to?
Yes.
Do you understand that as to count 1, conspiracy to violate the Racketeer, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, that it carries a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 20 years in custody?
Yes.
Do you understand this is a negotiated plea of guilty, which means that the state will recommend to the court a sentence that I will read, but the court does not have to accept this recommendation, and that the court can sentence you to the maximum on each charge?
Yes.
Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand that this plea The state's offer on this plea is, as to count 1, 10 years to serve 2 years, commute to time served with a balance of 8 years on probation. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand there are certain special conditions as it relates to this negotiation?
Yes.
For 1, you shall abide in full by each and all of the terms of this negotiated agreement, and your failure to abide by any of the terms of the agreement shall constitute a violation of this agreement. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand that you shall testify truthfully about all matters relating to this case upon which you are questioned at any trial or judicial proceeding stemming from the facts alleged in this indictment?
Yes.
Do you understand that in accordance with testifying truthfully about all matters related to this case, you acknowledge that each and all the statements contained within the defendant's factual acknowledgments portion of this agreement are true, and that you will testify truthfully about those statements and any matters related to this case when asked to do so?
Yes.
Okay, let's jump in right there. I want to say a couple of things right there. So he is, and this is pretty standard practice. We do the same thing here in Texas. At a plea, the state will go through what they're prosecuting him on, and then the defendant or his attorney will respond to all of that. Usually along the lines of, may it please the court, comes now the defendant XYZ. Mr. XYZ waives arraignment. He waives his right to a trial by jury. He waives his right to call witnesses on his behalf. He waives his right to cross-examine witnesses presented by the state, and he enters his plea of guilty to the charge. So something along those lines. Now, you heard him also say that he would, in fact, would testify truthfully at any trial. Now, that sounds very, very damning to the other defendants. But I want to show you all, where it's not necessarily that damning. It's not good, don't misunderstand me, but there are certainly ways to work around it. Why? Because, number one, if he takes the stand, he's going to endure a blistering cross-examination. A blistering cross-examination. The defense team is going to get into him like nobody business and basically try to show the jury that you cannot accept anything that this man has to say because he's pleading to this to save his bacon. And besides that, you can't trust anything he has to say because he's a convicted felon. I mean, he is a criminal. He is saying whatever he has to say to cover himself, to help himself. So they're gonna go at him, and they're gonna go at him hard. Okay? So it's not good for the other defendants who are going to go to trial that this man may take the stand and testify against them. And especially if he gets into a lot of details and this and that, it could make things, you don't want that. But once again, the defense is going to try to show that he has his own motives for testifying against the other folks. What do you say, Chloe?
Yeah, your second point was exactly what I was going to get into. But what stood out to me procedurally is the fact that the prosecutor is asking him questions about his rights, and he answering. Typically here in Texas, it's the judge that goes through, do you waive arraignment, going through his rights? Do you understand that this is a judicial confession? So it's interesting to me that he's testifying at the plea, because here in Texas, if there is an agreed plea, and it seems like there was one in this defendant's case, they called it a negotiated plea. We call it an agreed plea here in Texas. The prosecutor does enter some evidence at the plea hearing, but he or she typically does not question the defendant. So that's different to me. I wouldn't feel that comfortable with it. With the prosecutor being allowed to question the defendant like that. It's either the judge that does it or the defendant's own criminal defense attorney that will go through those questions, making sure he understands what he's pleading to. So that's different. Now we do it if there one is an agreed plea. If there's not an agreed plea and the defendant wants the judge to decide the punishment, so the defendant may agree to plead guilty, but then the judge will listen to the evidence or a jury and decide punishment. And the defendant may get on and testify, which will then allow the prosecutor to cross-examine him. But with agreed pleas, it's just different. It strikes me. Is it different for you?
Yeah, you make great points there. The last thing that you talked about is an open plea
Yeah.
here, where the defendant pleads guilty to the judge and then asks the judge to assess penalty, the punishment. And in that case, then there's still a guilty plea, but there's not an agreed punishment. In this situation, I think what likely happened here, Chloe, is pursuant to the negotiated plea, the defendant agreed to answer questions by the prosecutor. Okay.
That would make
Uh,
sense.
yeah, I think that's likely what happened here, and that does happen here too, when there are co-defendants, and the state, they would have to agree in the plea papers to basically to implicate co-defendants, and oftentimes at the plea they will ask the defendant questions then about the case, and so it does happen rarely, but typically, absolutely right. Prosecutors, you don't get to question my client. Okay, we got an agreed plea. Everything is worked out. You don't talk to him. Okay, the judge talks to him, just like you said, Chloe.
Yeah.
But not knowing Georgia law, I'm thinking that's probably what it was. As you pointed out, this use of negotiated plea. They likely were not going to extend this probation offer to him unless he implicated folks and agreed to say things on the record.
That sounds about right. And another thing that I wanted to point out to Dad is the prosecutor asked him, "Do you understand that by pleading guilty, this is a recommendation for punishment to the judge, but the judge does not have to accept it. The judge can give you the max punishment range for what you pled guilty to." Now here in Texas, it's the same case. The plea agreement is a agreement between the state and the defendant, and it is not, and the judge does not have to accept it. I don't know about in Georgia. Here in Texas, though, if the judge does not accept it, we call it busting the plea, then the guilty plea can be withdrawn. And like I said earlier, the state and the defendant can come up with another plea, or the defendant can plead not guilty. I don't know if that's the case in Georgia. I was listening to another YSL alleged defendant. His attorney asked if there was a negotiated plea apparently, and his attorney asked, "Well, judge, if he pleads guilty and you give him a sentence that's different from the negotiated plea, can he withdraw the guilty plea?" And that same judge said, "Well, I have to think about it." I don't know what he
Oh,
ultimately said. So I don't know if the law is the same there in Georgia. At least
wow.
here in Texas, the defendant can withdraw that guilty plea.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So there are a few things more I want us to hear from this defendant, and we'll be back. Hopefully, this thing starts where I stopped it.
All right, good afternoon, counsel. Answer parties from here on the record.
YSL founder Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, and YSL associates Martinez Arnold, Miles Farley, which I just mentioned, are true and accurate.
Yeah.
You and the Cleveland Avenue Rock Crew tattoo, amongst others, have relinquished any Fifth Amendment right related to any statement contained. Understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand there are certain special conditions as it relates to this negotiation?
Yes.
For one, you shall abide in full by each and all of the terms of this negotiated agreement, and your failure to abide by any of the terms of the agreement shall constitute a violation of this agreement. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand that you shall testify truthfully about all matters relating to this case upon which you are questioned at any trial or judicial proceeding stemming from the facts alleged in this indictment?
Yes.
Do you understand that in accordance with testifying truthfully about all matters related to this case, you acknowledge that each and all the statements contained within the defendant's factual acknowledgments portion of this agreement are true, and that you will testify truthfully about those statements and any matters related to this case when asked to do so?
Yes.
Do you understand as a special condition, you shall possess no guns unless your right to do so is restored?
Yes.
That you shall also submit to random drug screens by the Department of Community Supervision and any agency designated by this court?
Yes.
That you shall commit no criminal acts?
Yes.
And that you will relinquish any Fifth Amendment right related to any statement contained within the defendant's factual acknowledgments contained within this plea agreement, and you will make no attempt at trial to assert a Fifth Amendment privilege when questioned on these matters. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand that some of the factual acknowledgments that you acknowledged is one, that Young Slime Life, aka YSL, is an organization made up of 3 or more members or associates who share common identifiers that include but are not limited to colors, hand signals, and terminology, who have committed crimes intended to increase the notoriety, street credibility, and reputation of YSL. Is that one of your acknowledgments?
Yes.
Do you also acknowledge that you were one of the founding members of Young Slime Life?
Yes.
Do you also acknowledge that you committed an aggravated assault as alleged in count 1 of this indictment by brandishing a gun at an undercover police officer that was surveilling a vehicle that was hijacked from a woman?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that in October of 2014, you were arrested with a red bandana and you were observed with a YSL tattoo and a Cleveland Avenue Rock Crew tattoo amongst other tattoos?
Yes.
Do you also acknowledge in that same incident when you were asked by law enforcement about your Rock Crew and your YSL tattoos, that you truthfully advised law enforcement that you were a member of a gang called Rock Crew, but that group is no longer going by that name and now goes by YSL, which originally stood for Young Slime Life?
Yes.
Did you also in that same conversation advise law enforcement that YSL originally stood for Young Slime Life, but the group began calling itself Young Successful Lifestyle after Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, signed a record deal?
Yes.
Do you also acknowledge that the statements made to police about Rock Crew and YSL, as reflected in sections 3 and 4 above, which I just mentioned, are true and accurate?
Yes.
You acknowledge that you've been accused of and arrested for robbing women?
Yes.
You acknowledge that you are the same person referred to as Tick in the song by Young Thug entitled You, in the verse, she getting robbed by Tick?
Yes.
You also acknowledge that on February 4th, 2021, you participated in a group chat with fellow YSL founder Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, and YSL associates Wooney Lee, aka Slime Life Shorty, wherein Jeffrey Williams stated, "YSL rule the world, kid. Y'all just start bringing me the money. Man, y'all stop playing with me." Do you acknowledge that?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that on May 13, 2021, you participated in another group chat with fellow YSL founder Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, and YSL associates Martinez Arnold, Miles Farley, Quantavious Greer, Antonio Sumlin, Wooney Lee, wherein Jeffrey Williams asked, "Y'all ain't beat him up or shot him yet?" Then states, "Y'all getting soft."
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that the gas station at 151 Cleveland Avenue is a location where YSL associates sell drugs?
Yes.
That also the gas station at 221 Cleveland Avenue is a location where YSL associates sell drugs?
Yes.
And also, do you acknowledge that you cannot truthfully assert that anyone charged in this indictment is not guilty of the crimes as alleged in this indictment, and you will not make any attempt at trial, prior to trial, or after trial to exonerate or exculpate anyone charged in this indictment of the crimes alleged in this indictment, nor will you claim that anyone on this indictment is not guilty of the crimes as charged in this indictment.
Yes.
Do you also acknowledge that if you violate the plea agreement, the district attorney can and will use this statement during any judicial proceeding?
Yes.
You also understand and acknowledge that if you violate any portion of this plea agreement before, during, or after the initial...
Okay. So he acknowledged a lot. And once again, let me just reiterate that it's not good for the other defendants, but it's not fatal either. Just given his, past, given the fact that he pled to a felony, given the fact that he admitted to committing a lot of felonious acts, and the defense team is going to go at him and try to basically convince the jury you can't believe anything this man is saying. I mean, you cannot. This man is saying whatever he needs to say to help himself. So that's the way they're going to go at him for sure.
Man, all of that was so striking to hear. We know that the defense tactic, especially Young Thug and the other defendants who are going to trial on this case, what their tactics are going to be to try to prove that he is biased, he has a motive. Like you said, he's a convicted felon. But to hear the prosecutor go through all of those, what do they call it? We call it judicial confession. They call it acknowledgments, I think. To go through all of the acknowledgments in that plea agreement was very striking. And
It
to
was,
hear
Chloe.
him,
Yeah,
yeah,
I go back to what you were saying earlier. It was that rarely happens here in Texas. You're absolutely right about that. That rarely do you hear the prosecutor getting the opportunity to walk a defendant through the, I don't know what that document was, but she had, 25, 30 different questions.
yeah,
Now, again, there are times where the defendant will agree to implicate co-defendants, but it's
right.
usually not that detailed. So you're right, to hear him do that prior to being found guilty or prior to even going to trial it was striking. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, but as he is accused of a crime and now pled guilty to it, I believe that he needs to do what is best for him and to try to get the best result possible for his case. And that is the duty that his attorney has for him as well. Obviously, we don't know the evidence that the state had against him. We don't know how strong or weak it was. We don't know anything about the evidence. But for whatever reasons, he decided to take this plea deal. And it doesn't have to a lot of people, if you all don't know, most cases, they don't go to trial. They plead out. The defendant decides to take a plea deal for
About 80,
various reasons.
90% of the cases.
Yeah. So 8 or 9 out of 10 criminal cases in the US, it results in a plea deal. And it's not necessarily that the evidence is strong against the defendant. There could be other factors that are considered as well. So we don't know what factors were considered by Tick in order to take this plea deal, but it does go against the culture of hip hop and the culture of organized crime within hip hop and within the Black community to do this and to say these things on the record. However, he had to do what was necessary for him and what he felt was best for his life. Because, like we said earlier, only the defendant, he or she has the final decision whether or not to accept or reject a plea deal, and they have to consider what their life will look like going forward. So if he decided that he needed to take this plea deal and to answer all of these questions on the record and put it on the record, he made that decision for him. And he will have to live with the consequences, both the direct consequences as well as the collateral consequences that are outside of the courtroom. He's now a convicted felon. He'll never be able to possess a firearm. And there's all types of other collateral consequences that he will have to deal with and contend with, but he doesn't go to prison. So that's another consideration as well, there could have been a different result if he were found guilty at trial.
Well, I also want to point out, I heard something of one of the questions that the prosecutor asked him, and it just really broke my heart when she asked, "What level of education did you achieve?" And he said he got a GED. Well, that resonated with me because I have a GED. I dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. I, by the grace of God, was able to rebound, went into the Navy, um, went to college, law school, even a year in seminary. But I was headed to a bad place early in my life. And so I assume that this young man has had a difficult life, a very difficult life. And quite often growing up in conditions like that, in an environment that I presume he grew up in. Now, I don't know this to be the case. I don't know this young man. He may have grown up in a middle class family, or upper middle class, great family. I don't know. But I'm assuming that because he uh, has only a GED, that he grew up in tough circumstances. And if that assumption is right, it doesn't excuse any criminal behavior, but it certainly increases the chances of young people going down that road when you're living in that kind of environment, in that type of situation. Probably poverty, maybe a broken family, maybe a community where drugs and crimes and criminals are all around, schools, failing schools, and all the stuff you see in many low-income urban communities, and it results in just that. I wrote a book, Education and Justice, where I talk about how. Let me just grab this book where I talk about in my book how when kids are kicked out of school um, and are pushed out of school, um, don't make it through school, that oftentimes result in those kids being placed on the school to prison pipeline. So I just got to say that on behalf of this young man and probably a lot of these young men. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, but this is the job. This is oftentimes, Chloe, with our clients, we have to make the court aware of this. We have to make the prosecutors aware of this. Yeah, it's easy to sit in judgment of this young man when um, grew up in a nice family, grew up in a nice neighborhood, grew up, across the tracks, as it were. Doesn't make excuses for this young man. And I also have to point out that 400 years of racial oppression, systemic racism, has had its toll on the Black community and has broken down the Black community in many ways. And so a lot of these young men end up turning to a life of crime because of these conditions. Okay? So I got to throw that in. I got to throw that in. All right? I got to throw that in, Chloe, because I understand this thing. I understand this system. I was almost there myself. Could have been there just like this young man, but for the grace of God. So I pray this young man and all of these young men find their way. I pray that they find Jesus. I pray that they give their lives to the Lord. I pray that some good comes out of this, okay? That's what I pray. So that's the minister side of me. That's the Christian side of me coming out right there, because my heart goes out to these young men.
Man, that was so necessary to bring up and to bring into the forefront, Dad. Um, on a personal level, on our professional levels, like you said, we see this with our clients. We see the effect of um, oppression and racism and inequity has on young black kids who turn into young black men who oftentimes do turn to different ways in order for connection. And that's a lot of times that's what it is. You know, when these young kids join these organizations, or they're in the neighborhood, or join these syndicates, it's because they're trying to connect with people and to find that love and that place in their life. And unfortunately, sometimes they may turn to crime in order to get that connection. But where does it stem from? And we always have to connect it back to systemic racism. And you know, as Christians, we always connect it back to Satan and everything else. So I love that you brought that out. And another larger conversation that these trials and these pleas have brought out, Dad, is rap music and using lyrics in court, and whether or not they should be used in court and should be used against these rappers and music artists. And
Chloe,
you know,
before we go there, sweetheart, let me just once again say that this brings no joy to me seeing this happen to these young men because, again, I bet you a shiny new nickel that these young men grew up in conditions that put them on the path to this. Country does not want to do what's necessary to help the African American community economically and so forth so that these kids can have a fair chance and not feel constrained to turn to lives of crimes, a life of crime. No, they just, you know, just fill the community up with police officers, throw the book at these kids, don't give them much opportunity. Okay. Um, we got to do something to help these kids, and that's we're trying to do that. We're trying to do that. Go to my website www.cusham.org. That's CUSHAAM.org. CUSHAAM.org. Chloe, I'm tearing up. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get through this, but Cusham, it stands for Churches United to Save and Heal African American Males. Cusham, CUSHAAM.org. And then use your name, Cush and Ham. It's an acronym for what I just told you. And it's also a contraction of Cush and Ham, who were the ancestors of the African people. Ham was one of Noah's son, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and Ham had a son named Cush. And the word Cush in the Hebrews is the word dark skin. It basically means dark skin, brown skin. So it essentially tells us Cush was a black man. And by the way, if Cush was black, uh, his brothers were probably black, and Noah and his wife black. So they were probably black people. All right. Definitely people of color. Again, that's what the word Cush literally means, dark skin. Now, unless you believe that two parents can have a dark-skinned child and a white child at the same time, then you must agree with me that they were probably at least brown-skinned, dark-skinned black people, at least people of color. So that's where the name comes from. It's both a contraction of Cush and Ham, and it's also an acronym, Churches United to Save and Heal African American Men. Doesn't mean that churches or Christians are the only ones who are invited to participate in this effort, but it's an effort the Lord put on my heart you all, yes, I am a minister. I'm an attorney, but I'm also a minister. And a huge part of my ministry is reaching out to young African American men. Okay. And part of that is because I, again, am a high school dropout. I was abandoned by my father. Um, I went through a lot of the same issues these young men go through. And if it wasn't for God's grace, I would be in prison myself today or dead. Okay. And it's not because I was a bad person or criminal or any of that, but because of the conditions and the circumstances that I grew up in. I grew up behind the eight ball. Um, Systemic racism was huge where I'm from, and I'm from North Carolina. It's just a couple of states up from Georgia. Okay, so I'm very familiar with this part of the country, and I know what we deal with as African Americans in this part of the country. So uh, I don't look at these young men in judgment. Okay, they may have done some bad things. Okay, and it looks like they're going to be punished for it. All right. But listen, um, a lot of that again stem from what they grew up facing and what they grew up lacking and what they didn't have and what this country has done to our community and refused to repair and to rebuild. So I had to say that.
And just because someone does bad things and are rightfully punished by the criminal justice system doesn't mean that our Heavenly Father, we're irredeemable to them. So this is not just a YouTube channel for us. This is not just a law firm for us. You just heard why we're so passionate about helping young people, especially young Black men and women, because it's personal to us. And not only do we have that ministry, but we also have a nonprofit law firm, a public interest law firm called Lazarus Law and Justice Project, which is where we focus on helping the wrongfully convicted. And we've done that, and it has been very fulfilling as well. So you can go check that out as well, lljp.org, in addition to Cusham. And we will provide all of the links below in the description box. And you can check out those websites and see what else we're doing outside of the YouTube and podcasting space in order to use our talents, our personal experiences to help the dejected, the vulnerable, etc. So thank you so
Uh,
much for sharing that with our listeners, Dad.
yes, you all, I had, I grew up with, I grew up with five boys. I grew up in a blended family. I had a few biological brothers, and I had brothers that I grew up with. And of those five boys that I grew up with, I am the only one living. I'm the only one living today. I preached two of their funerals, two of them. One was 15 when he got killed in the streets, and one was 20 when he got killed in the streets. One was killed in North Carolina, and one was killed in New York City. And none of them, got beyond 32 years old. I'm 60. I'll be 61 in February. I know what African American men deal with.
And you're living proof that of God's mercy and God's grace for us and the demonic forces that are coming after black men and young black boys. We talked about the young man at the beginning, the top of the hour. My uncles who had so much life to live and whose lives were taken. Other people whose lives have been affected. George Floyd, Tamir Rice, and countless others.
Just go to any inner city neighborhood and you'll see these same young men everywhere. Just
Yes.
go, just ride through, and you'll see them hanging out in the streets. And you may judge them and say they need to go to school, they need to get a job, they need to do this and that. These kids grew up, they were born in these situations oftentimes.
Yeah.
And these conditions have been created over 400 years. It was just 100 or so years ago that our people were enslaved in states like Georgia, North Carolina. Just several generations ago. Then we dealt with 100 or so years, even after slavery, of Jim Crow laws. Slavery by another name, basically. And we're still dealing with this mess. I'm not excusing criminality. But I'm telling you, any group of people experience what we've experienced here would be having the same issues. Any group.
And that's the truth. Don't let, the cultural strife, the racial strife that is occurring in this country, the attempted erasure of America's history and what has happened to us as a people, it being couched as wokeness. There's this in wokeness movement that the conservatives or a portion of this country are trying to do. Um, you know, taking books out of public libraries, not wanting to teach this history to our students. There is a concerted effort to minimize what has been done to us as a people that has caused exactly what my dad is talking about. But that's why we're here, and that's why one of the reasons why we started this YouTube channel and why we do all of the things that we do.
So
If we
Chloe, I just hope that the DA there and these black DAs around the country who are going after these gangbangers, alleged gangbangers, I hope that they're just as passionate about doing things in these communities to improve these communities so these kids, these young people don't grow up thinking that all they can do in life is rap, sell drugs, gang bang. So I hope, what is her name?
think Fannie Willis.
Fannie Willis, Miss Willis. I don't begrudge you for you doing your job and trying to protect the citizens of DeKalb County, Georgia. I don't begrudge you at all. You got my respect. But I pray that you're also doing everything you can to stop seeing young men like Jeffrey Williams and this young man and all these other young men, that they have the opportunity to have a good life, just like the white kids, just like the Asian kids, and that they don't grow up in these communities where, again, their only option in their mind is crime, rapping, football, or something else. So, and Chloe, you make a good point that Georgia and we all know the history of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
We know. Just go outside of Atlanta. Okay, we're familiar with the state of Georgia. All right, Ahmaud Arbery. We're very familiar with the state of Georgia and its history. Lester Maddox and all the rest of them. Okay. All right. So, Chloe, I think we should probably go ahead on and end this.
I agree. That's
Yeah.
the perfect end cap to this discussion and to usher into the new year.
I know you want to do a Tory Lanez update, and you
No, I can
also,
do it in another video.
yeah, that's what I was going to say, as well as the issue of prosecutors using rap music to prosecute these young men. We did a video on that too, but I know you got some things you want to say about that. Maybe you can do it in another video.
Yes.
But I think this is a great place to end. And so you heard our heart today. This is who we are. This is, Chloe said, this is the reason why we're up here. We represent these young men, but we fight for these young men too. We fight for them. Many of them, Chloe, I'm not ashamed to say it. I know you're not ashamed to say it. Many of them, we pray with them to receive Christ in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know if we can get these young men saved, if we can get these young men in church, if we can get them off the streets, that'll keep them out of our office and keep them out of Fannie Willis's office.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So, all right. So we'll
Thank
end
you all
it
for
here.
joining us. Happy New Year. This was episode 1 of season 2. An amazing episode. All new subscribers, new listeners. This is us. This is our heart. This is who we are. We are the Defiant Lawyers. We will be, uploading videos and podcasts every Saturday. And we look forward to you all continuing to join us on this journey. Thank you so much. Peace.